Imagine for a moment that someone asked us to draw a graph that represented population density against distance from a major metropolitan area. What would that graph look like? For a lot of people, the simplest way to draw it would be something like this. The density drops in proportion to the distance. Makes sense, right? But if we think about it a bit more, it's never going to be that simple, is it? These things never are. Now, we might try to get hold of some solid data on this, but what we'd probably end up with is something a bit like this. That's all well and good, but it's messy and it doesn't tell us a whole lot, really. So we'd try to draw a pattern in there somewhere, and we'd accept that with such a line of best fit, we'd necessarily have outliers, but we'd try to do the best we could. Now that best fit line would probably look something like this. But for the purposes of clarity, let's remove all the outliers. We don't really need them right now. So, now let me explain why I think this is roughly right. At the top there, we still have the high population density close to the metropolitan centre. You may wonder, by the way, why I've left a gap and not started from a distance of 0. Well, the fact is, most major cities now have a business district to their centre which has little or no population living in it. Drawing that in would obviously make our graph a little bit weird, without really telling us anything we didn't already know, so we can safely leave that bit out. Now, from our metropolitan centre, the density falls quite quickly, passing through various stages of urban before reaching a kind of plateau, which represents the suburban, or possibly a smaller urban area, many cities having grown to swallow these whole. Once we pass that, we again see a major drop-off towards a second plateau, which is the rural or semi-rural towns and villages. After that, it drops off once more, and again, I haven't finished the graph at the bottom end. And the reason for that is that here in the UK and in Europe generally, we don't have a whole lot of wilderness. So whilst density will get lower and lower, it's pretty much impossible to draw it meaningfully apart from maybe a line very close to the bottom, which again doesn't really tell us anything we didn't already know. Equally, we may very well reach the point where we start heading in towards the next urban or metropolitan area, and so see the graph mirror as density begins to climb again. So that's a rough picture of how density works. Now I want you to imagine that instead of population density, we've been asked to plot agricultural intensity against that same distance axis. How would that look? Well, oddly, it seems to be pretty much the exact mirror image of our first graph. We do almost all of our high-intensity agriculture in our rural areas. Consider the fields of wheat we grow, or the greenhouses full of tomatoes, or any of the countless other high-intensity crops. They're pretty much all grown in rural areas. In fact, you could argue that in some cases the dividing line between wilderness and the lowest density of rural is actually the presence of agriculture. It may just be one farmhouse in a huge mass of land, but it is population after all. After that, it falls away again in similar stages. At the rural and semi-rural level, there's still quite a lot, obviously. Then away and down again, with a brief plateau for the suburbs, where allotments and community gardens are still around. And by the time we get to the towns, and on especially to our metropolitan centre, there's almost none left, bar a handful of allotments if we're lucky. So let's put this on the same chart as our population density chart, and it all becomes clear. What you see there is, to my mind, the very essence of the problem with our food systems. At every level, we separate people more and more from the food they eat. There was a time when this made sense, of course, when agriculture in the hinterlands around a city was a logical way to do things, but no longer. This has grown into a global monster of a system, where food is grown hundreds, even thousands of miles from where it's consumed, with all the costs that go along with that. Vertical and urban farming set out specifically to address these very problems, by bringing food growing into metropolitan and urban areas. In so doing, it also found ways to reduce food miles, water use, pesticide use, and fertiliser use. Now, it's searching for ways to implement a circular economy, to reuse and thus eliminate waste streams, and to reduce to the barest minimum the inputs required. So what would be the ideal here? I propose that it would look like this, where density and intensity match one another. Is that going to be possible to get such a perfect match as this? Well, not at the moment probably, but I think in the future definitely. At any rate, the point is that it gives us something to aspire to. It also gives us a path and a map to follow it. All we need to do is keep this in mind and aim to design our food system wherever possible such that our food growing intensity matches our population density as closely as possible. It's a really simple principle, but the implications are huge. We can have vertical farms growing hydroponically, aeroponically and aquaponically. we can continue to have and expand upon the likes of transition towns in the smaller urban areas and suburbs, with community gardens and allotments and food not lawns and so on. And then out in the rural areas we can use agroecology to reduce the intensity and accompanying damage of our food growing there. What's more, as we don't need so much rural space to grow food, it being grown more where the people are, we can return areas that just have that one farmhouse back to being wilderness, or at the very least managed wild spaces, to the desperately needed benefit of ecosystems everywhere. Furthermore, this simple principle gives governments and agencies the world over somewhere to start from when looking at how to reform and improve food systems. At every level, from central government down through councils in cities, regions, local areas and so on, planning departments can work this into their core strategies and development documents, giving them the tools to implement a sustainable food future. What we have here then is the starting point for a complete model of food sustainability throughout society, and it's all possible. It'll take a lot of work, make no mistake about that, but it can be done, and it's up to all of us to make sure that it is.